Edwin awoke at exactly 6:45 a.m. As always, his body simply refused to entertain the concept of a lie-in, even on Sundays. Especially on Sundays, he sat up, turned to the window, and nodded approvingly at the weather. It was laundry gray, that special kind of overcast that made drying clothes outdoors completely impractical, but drying them indoors just smug enough to feel clever about it. After placing his feet into his perfectly aligned slippers, still undefeated champions of bedroom order, Edwin made his way to the kitchen for the usual slice of buttered toast, no jam, no nonsense, and a cup of weak tea so bland it could be mistaken for warm water with ambitions. After breakfast, he approached the laundry basket with a sense of ceremony. He lifted the lid slowly, revealing a modest but respectable pile of clothes, a mix of muted tones, grays, browns, and the occasional navy blue, which Edwin considered daring. He sniffed a sock, not because it was necessary, but because it felt like the right thing to do. Satisfied, he gathered the contents into a neat pile and made his way to the washing machine. The journey from the bathroom to the kitchen and then the laundry nook took approximately 3 minutes, with a quick pause to pick a bit of fluff off his cardigan and inspect it like it held secrets. He opened the washing machine door as if revealing a portal to another dimension, a damp, slightly musty dimension with lint. Edwin sorted his laundry with the kind of precision normally reserved for heart surgeons or people defusing bombs. Darks to the left, lights to the right, and a small ambiguous category in the middle labeled socks that might once have been white. He eyed a jumper with suspicion. It was beige, but was it dark beige or light beige? He held it to the window, tilted his head, and whispered, "You're pushing it." Into the darks it went. With the machine loaded, Edwin selected the setting. He chose the same one he always did, mixed load eco wash, 30 degrees Celsius, because change was not something Edwin welcomed, especially in spin cycles. He poured the detergent with the careful hand of a chemist and closed the door with a satisfying click. The hum of the machine starting up brought him a peculiar sense of achievement. A small part of him imagined applause. The rest of him reached for a digestive biscuit. Now came the waiting. He returned to his armchair and opened a crossword from last week's newspaper. It was already half completed, but he didn't mind. He preferred crosswords that had already given up a bit. Across 7, a dull task performed weekly, 7 letters. Edwin chuckled to himself. Laundry, he said aloud. It was actually boredom, but his answer worked too. Outside, a bird chirped once, then apparently thought better of it. The washing machine hummed and whirred, sounding rather like a distant helicopter on a very unimportant mission. Edwin glanced at the timer. 27 minutes remaining. Enough time, he figured, for a cup of tea and a quiet moment of contemplation about lint. In the kitchen, he selected his usual chipped mug, the one with the faded image of a puffin and the slogan, "Keep calm and kettle on." He had never particularly liked puffins, but the mug had become part of his routine and therefore sacred. The kettle clicked off. He poured the water over a bag of plain black tea, no herbal nonsense, and gave it exactly 37 seconds to steep. Milk, 1 sugar, stir 3 times clockwise. He took a sip and nodded approvingly, as though he'd just won a minor award in beverage preparation. Returning to his armchair, tea in hand, Edwin picked up his book. It was a crime thriller he'd been reading for 8 months. The killer had already been revealed, but Edwin liked the way the protagonist described sandwiches. He managed 3 pages before the machine beeped. Not a melodious beep, more a dull, "you may now intervene" sort of sound. He placed his mug on a coaster because he wasn't a barbarian and stood. Edwin made his way to the laundry nook like a man approaching something both inevitable and vaguely damp. Edwin opened the washing machine door with the reverence of a man disarming a moderately annoyed badger. A faint puff of steam drifted out, carrying with it the warm, oddly comforting scent of lavender detergent, which, in truth, Edwin only used because it had been on sale 7 months ago. He began removing each item one by one, giving them a gentle shake and inspecting them as if auditioning them for a very underwhelming stage play. "Satisfactory," he murmured, holding up a vest. A sock appeared, then another, then a third, which was, alarmingly, not part of the original pair. It was slightly darker and had a faint, accusing wrinkle. Edwin sighed. Sock mismatches were, after all, a scourge. He placed it on the probationary sock chair to await future pairing. The rest of the laundry was unfurled and hung with precision on his folding indoor rack, which was stationed, as always, 2 feet from the radiator, facing the window at a 47-degree angle. He had once read this maximized airflow, or maybe he'd made that up. Either way, it felt important. As the final item was clipped into place, his least favorite pair of underpants, a gift, naturally, Edwin took a step back and surveyed the scene. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly acceptable tableau of washed textiles. A man less seasoned might now be tempted to engage in something wild, perhaps rearranging his sock drawer or considering the idea of color-coded hangers. But Edwin knew the value of restraint. Instead, he returned to his armchair, reclaimed his puffin mug, now lukewarm, and resumed reading about sandwiches. By 3:07 p.m., the laundry was dry. Edwin knew this not because he'd touched it or checked, but because 3:07 p.m. had always been the designated drying conclusion hour, weather permitting, and even when it didn't. He approached the drying rack like a curator inspecting a particularly underwhelming exhibit. One by one, he plucked the garments free, folding each with crisp, precise movements that would have brought a lesser man to tears. The t-shirts were folded into perfect rectangles, the trousers aligned like soldiers awaiting tea. The socks, barring the one rogue loner still sitting on the probationary sock chair, were paired, rolled, and softly pressed like diplomatic documents. When he reached the underpants, Edwin hesitated. There was always the existential quandary, drawer on the left, or the one slightly more to the left. He split the difference and used the middle drawer. Risky, bold, slightly thrilling. After everything was sorted, Edwin stood in the hallway holding the empty laundry basket. He looked at it for a long moment, not with affection, but with something close to professional respect. Then came the final ritual, placing the basket back in the cupboard under the stairs. He turned the handle with 2 fingers, opened the door exactly halfway, any more and it squeaked, and nestled the basket into its sacred nook between the vacuum cleaner and a stack of old newspaper clippings titled "Boiled Egg Tips." With the door closed and the universe back in alignment, Edwin straightened his back, nodded faintly to no one in particular, and returned to the living room. Another chore done. Another day slightly less chaotic than it might have been. At precisely 4:15 p.m., Edwin declared it tea time. Not aloud, of course. Declarations were reserved for state affairs and the occasional crossword triumph. But he nodded gravely, which, in Edwin's speak, was as raucous as a drum roll. He shuffled to the kitchen, where the kettle awaited like a faithful, slightly lime-scaled companion. He filled it to exactly the halfway mark, not because he needed that much water, but because any less made the kettle sound overeager. He didn't care for overeager appliances. As the kettle boiled, Edwin selected a tea bag with ceremonial reverence. He bypassed the peppermint, too radical, ignored the green, too judgmental, and settled on the Earl Grey, strong, dependable, slightly perfumed, like a Victorian aunt who smelled faintly of mothballs and power. He placed the tea bag in the chipped mug, the same mug he'd used every day since 1997. It bore the faded slogan, "World's Okayest Man." It was a gift from his cousin Mervyn, who'd meant it as a joke, but Edwin had taken it as a perfectly reasonable assessment. When the kettle clicked off, he poured the hot water slowly, letting it steep for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Not a moment more, not a moment less. He added 1 sugar cube, diagonally, of course, and a dash of milk that created a perfect beige spiral, like a tiny galaxy of routine. He took the first sip standing up, as was custom, then sat in his armchair with the mug balanced on a coaster shaped like the Isle of Wight. There, in the waning afternoon light, he sighed with the weight of a man who had wrestled socks, conquered folding, and now claimed his rightful reward. As he sipped, he glanced toward the mantelpiece clock. Exactly 4:23 p.m. "Perfect," he whispered. And for Edwin, it was. At 6 p.m. sharp, Edwin stood in his kitchen and pondered dinner. The choices were dizzying. He could have the leftover vegetable stew, too ambitious, the emergency baked beans, too apocalyptic, or his old standby, boiled potatoes and a slice of cold ham. He went with the ham. Why introduce chaos this late in the day? He plated it neatly. 1 potato, sliced, spaced out like runway lights, a small pat of butter melted slowly across them, no more, no less than a gentleman's dollop. He ate in silence, the only sound being the soft plink of his fork against the plate and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. A man clearly living on the edge by mowing at dusk. After washing his single plate, fork, and mug with the precision of a watchmaker, Edwin retreated to the lounge, not to the armchair. That was his reading chair. This was telly time. For this, he chose the chair. It was identical in every way to the armchair, except it faced the television and had slightly more cushion sink. He sank into it like a man being gently devoured by upholstery. The television flickered to life, already tuned to a documentary about Roman aqueducts. Edwin smiled faintly. Nothing got the heart racing quite like ancient water logistics. At 8:03 p.m., the narrator said the phrase hydraulic ingenuity, and Edwin actually chuckled. Twice. By 8:47 p.m., he had stood, performed his 2 daily stretches, 1 for each hamstring, and wandered to the bathroom. He brushed his teeth with his electric toothbrush, which buzzed like an enthusiastic bumblebee trying not to make a scene. Then he put on his pajamas, a soft blue pair that matched nothing in the house except his dreams. At 9 p.m. on the dot, Edwin slid into bed. the slippers aligned at the footboard like loyal guards. He reached to turn off the bedside lamp, and just before the room surrendered to darkness, Edwin whispered, "Well, that'll do.